Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Lars Grønnegaard Hansen, CEO and co-founder of Dreamdata, a B2B revenue attribution platform that's raised over $12 million in funding. Lars, what's going on today?
I'm here in Copenhagen. Looking forward to the interview. I think it's going to be great.
So to start things off, I did butcher your middle name there. So if you can go ahead and correct the record, how do we say your name?
I think you did very, very well there. So it's Grønnegaard. Yeah, I think Grønnegaard is what I get from most Americans. I think that was very good.
Okay, so we did our best. I didn't insult you, and we can start off here on a positive note. That's good. Let's go ahead and just kick off with a little bit more about your background and your journey and what you were doing before you founded Dreamdata.
Yeah, let's start with that. So I came from a company called Trustpilot prior to doing this venture. Mm-hmm. So me and one of the other co-founders worked there as head of product and head of engineering. So that's sort of the immediate background for this. Before that, I spent a lot of time in user experience. Also before it was actually a discipline that existed. So we pioneered it in Copenhagen. We're like some of the first people doing UX consulting here.
I didn't realize that Trustpilot was from Copenhagen.
There's a handful of companies that you'd be surprised are Danish. Like you might know, which like this wine app where you can just scan wine labels, that's Danish. Yeah, there's a handful of unicorns out of Copenhagen.
Who's like the biggest company that people talk about? Like in Sweden, they have their Klarna. Like who's your Klarna? But maybe be a good way to ask it.
There are companies that nobody knows, and then there are the ones that people very much know, especially in the SaaS community. So Zendesk is founded in Copenhagen. I think everybody knows Zendesk. That's probably the biggest one.
Nice. Very cool. How have you seen the Copenhagen tech scene evolve over the last maybe 10 years?
So I think it's very good, especially like some of those companies that were successful during sort of the late like 15 to 20 that has sparked off a nice trickle of new ventures. Like I would say Dreamdata is one of them. There are a bunch of really nice companies coming out of Copenhagen now. Some of them are not in the States yet, but there are some very nice companies here. So there's a nice scene here. You also go to Sweden, Stockholm. Stockholm is a bit, I would say, they're kind of one generation ahead of us. They had Spotify. You say Skype was sort of a part Danish. Like if you're Danish, you say Skype is Danish. If you're Swedish, you say Swedish. But those two ventures definitely also spun off a lot of new ventures after that.
And let's switch gears and let's dive into Dreamdata, everything that you're doing today. At a high level, how do you describe the problem that you're solving?
So basically, I would say like high level, we're helping B2B marketers be revenue centric. I think that's kind of an age-old problem. When we founded the company, people have been trying to do that for 5 years. So it wasn't new, but we're solving it in a very sort of data-centric way. And I think that's what's unique about our approach.
And for context setting, when it comes to your market category, how are you positioned? What is the market category?
If you look at us in the market, we are a B2B revenue attribution platform.
What's that category look like? And how are you positioned in that category against the...
I would say, because attribution is basically a feature, you can say. It's just, imagine you have all the data about all the behaviors of people that are sort of in your world. And then you have the outcomes, typically like pipeline or new business results, and you have all the spend. Put all that together. And attribution is just the algorithm of sort of attaching the revenue to the different tactics and things that happened in the customer journey. So that's what attribution is. So that I would say is what the category is like products that do that. So pioneers of the category would be a company called Visible. They later acquired by Adobe through Marketo. So they acquired first by Marketo and then Adobe. And the category now is, I would say, of course, we're the category leaders. And then there are a couple of other small companies in the category as well.
What's your point of view on the attribution category?
I think the big thing, we came into this at a point when the whole sort of modern data stack was happening. So we wanted something that worked with that for sure. So we wanted sort of ability to integrate into data warehouses, integrate with modern tracking solutions. That's one big piece of it. And the other big piece is that attribution is sort of Like at one end, it's about credit, like who gets credit for what. And that in itself is like it doesn't bring anything good to any company. Like if you meet someone who thinks attribution is about assigning credit to marketing and getting credit to what marketing does, it's typically not a very good situation because it signals that you are sort of an antagonistic relationship between sales and marketing. I think the great companies that use attribution, they see it as an optimization tool. So basically you look at what you're doing and you look at the outcomes. A bit like if you're doing, say, product analytics, you'll do funnels from on your sign up page of the people who signed up, how many got started in the product. Well, we want to do the same for marketing. I spent some money. Of that money, how much opportunity did we actually create? How much new business did we create? So I think our approach is this optimization approach. And then also very much one of automation. I think if you imagine larger companies, you might have hundreds, even thousands of campaigns running at the same time. And if you ask someone to sit and optimize that by hand, kind of doesn't work. You really want something that do a bit like what you've been seeing in B2C for the last 15, 20 years, sort of automatic optimization. So that's our big take on it.
I saw you recently released a report on the 8 B2B benchmarks you need to know for driving efficient growth. Can you share a couple of those benchmarks and talk through the findings from that survey or the research, I should say?
Yeah, so I think none of this is surprising, but I think what a lot of people just don't have evidence for it. So what we did, we have a free product. So that means we get a lot of data from a lot of companies and we can see so what is the actual, everybody knows a sales cycle. So you enter the sales pipeline, you exit it, everybody knows that. But what about all the stuff that happened before? That's one of the big things. Like one of the 8 benchmarks was around like, how long is that actually? And I think it came out at like more than 200 days. Of course, it can be a lot longer for some and shorter for others. But there's having evidence around like, what does it actually take to take a B2B customer from nothing to being a customer? That was an eye-opener for many.
How would you summarize your own marketing approach and your own marketing philosophy?
So I think our go-to-market is like at one end, we're very much a marketing-led approach with 3 co-founders. 2 came from product, 1 came from marketing. And Stefan, who is the marketing guy, he's a very strong marketer. And that brought us to this. You can also hear like with 3 founders, 1 product, 1 engineer, and a marketing guy, so no sales guy. So I think our approach is definitely marketing-led. So everything is brought in through various marketing tactics, ranging from like we do a lot of organic social. We also do some paid, of course. And then, yeah, we're product people. We can't sort of escape that. So we have, I wouldn't call it product-led growth, but it's very much product-assisted sales motion. So everybody will go through a trial. We also have a free product. So we do sort of have people entering, doing either the free product or free trial and upgrading. So that does happen, but we're not Miro or some of the real like true PLG companies. We're not like that.
What about your podcast? I see that you have the Attributed podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast, I think, is part of this organic social strategy. So we have a strong presence on LinkedIn. We sell to marketers, B2B marketers. They love LinkedIn and they live their life there. So it's a very good place for us to exist and be. Like we connect with the market there. And podcast is another way of doing that. So basically, like we call it podcast, but what we actually do is like we do a lot of LinkedIn Lives. So I guess it's like more tech. What is it? So we do LinkedIn Lives with like strong names in the industry, customers that have great results, et cetera. So that's also part of the strategy for sure.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
What's a good LinkedIn Live for you? Are you happy if you get like 200 people there, 2,000? Like what's a good LinkedIn Live for you?
I can tell you that it maxes out at 600 because that's what the platform can take. So if we get to 600, we're very happy. It's sort of like think about 600 people listening to, usually actually not what we're saying. Usually the 600 people will mostly be listening to the person that we brought on. We had Chris Walker recently, that maxed out at 600 for sure. That was a great LinkedIn Live. Yeah, so 600, that's fantastic for us.
Is there anything from a marketing perspective that you've stopped doing that you were previously doing? Maybe it was working before and you've just seen it decline and stop working?
No, not really. I think we're building small things on to the motion. We do some sort of, you can say, we do physical events now. We don't buy a booth or anything, but we'll join and sort of do guerrilla and go and talk to people, especially like meet people that we are trying to sell to, meet people that are customers there. I wouldn't say that we stopped doing anything. No.
What's the strategy with analyst firms like Gartner?
Yeah, analysts. So we haven't done that. So that's like a big question mark, whether we should do that. I would say it's also to do with how we approach the market. We came from an idea of sort of scalability. So we started, I would say, at small business. So the bottom of SMB, so maybe 50 to a couple of hundred people. And they don't use analysts. Like they don't use Gartner. They don't use Forrest. They get that type of companies like our company. We don't use it. When we're researching a new product, we'll be on G2, we'll be on LinkedIn, we'll be asking. So we haven't really gone that route. As we sort of, like everybody else, we're pushing up market, gradually sort of expanding towards upper mid-market, smaller enterprises. And that's definitely, as we progress into that space, it might be something that we look into.
What have you learned from that push up market? Like you said, everyone's trying to do that. That's the aspiration of every team. What have you learned from that push? Because it's not easy.
It's definitely not easy. I think we had realistic ideas about what it would take. So yeah, I can say, okay, I can share some of the failures here. So initially, after like 5 customers or something, we actually landed 2 companies I define as enterprise. And I can say that wasn't a good idea because at that stage, the product was not even a product. I would say it was more like a prototype and a ton of duct tape and lots of PowerPoints. And that didn't work. I mean, it could have worked if we had gone sort of completely almost professional services on them. But given that we wanted to build a product, it didn't work. So the next attempt at larger companies, I think we were much better prepared and we had much more of a product. We also had a lot of what you would define as like enterprise readiness capabilities. So we did have like answers to like single sign-on, some answers to InfoSec, a lot of the things that are required in that space. So the thing, yeah, of course, try it, but also be prepared to meet very different demands, of course, than what you see with an SMB customer.
One thing that I see people talk about a lot is this idea that developers are very hard to market to. I believe that marketers are very, very hard to market to because they can see right through everything that you're doing and they're very critical. What do you do to rise above all of the noise to capture the attention of B2B marketers and get them engaged in your product?
Yeah, so I think it has been a key thing for us to have a strong marketer on the founding team because you have somebody who has a lot of credibility in that community and knows how marketers think. So I think that has been a key thing for us in enabling us to talk to that community. And then I would say, if you're marketing to marketers, I think you need to try things, whatever you do, but especially as you're marketing to marketers, you can't just do what everybody else does. You need some creativity in what you do. You need to be bold. You need to try some things that not everybody else is doing. So you need to develop like new ways of interacting and be creative. Yeah.
What's the most creative thing you've done so far in marketing?
I think we've had many successes. I would say one of the things we did, I think this is also a bit back to approach. This wasn't super intentional. So one of our salespeople was going to New York. Our CMO was also going. They were going to this conference. It was in Times Square. And she came to me and said, "Hey, Lars, can I buy a billboard on Times Square?" I was like, "How much is it?" She's like, $500. Like, okay, you can buy a billboard in Times Square. So she bought a billboard in Times Square for $500. And then our designer did some creative. I think it said our CMO wanted to spend this money on Google ads, right? And then it was only showing like, I don't know, 30 seconds, 1 minute every hour or something for 24 hours. So she got him out there. She was just going to surprise him. And then she's just like interviewing him, pretending it's something else. And then he can see this billboard. And then he has this like super nice reaction to it. Just like he wasn't expecting it. So it's very funny. And then that just turns into a very, very nice piece of content, right? So I think that was a great success from sort of a creative piece of advertising. It wasn't super intentional, but if you do a lot of these nuts, very intentional things, and occasionally you hit on these little like gold nuggets that will generate a lot of awareness in the market.
As I mentioned there in the intro, you've raised over 12 million to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
Yeah, I think what's your IP? Like, what's your ideal investor profile? That was one thing. I'd never raised venture capital before, so didn't know anything about the market. I think if you haven't stepping into this field, there are like thousands of funds. And then they're not all your ideal investor profile. So like find funds that fit your stage. If you're very good, find ones that sort of fit and have knowledge of your market or at least the business model you're running. So ideal investor profile, I think that's a key thing that I learned. I wasted tons of time talking to later stage investors very early on, and nothing will probably ever come of all those hours I wasted there.
What about go-to-market lessons for other companies that are trying to sell to B2B marketers? Or maybe a better way to frame that, let's imagine that a founder there in Copenhagen comes to you and they say, Lars, I want to build a product, or I have a product, I want to sell it to B2B marketing teams. What's the number one piece of go-to-market advice that you'd have for them based on everything you've learned?
So my number one thing is I have a couple of things that I feel we learned along the way. So one was focus some more, and then focus even more. When you think you're focused, you're not. So narrow down, like find a very, very narrow ICP when you start, and don't mistake your initial ICP for your TAM. Like your total addressable market is going to be large if you want to raise money and build a large company, but that's not your ICP, right? I think we did that mistake. We were kind of scared to go super narrow on the ICP and just say, look, we're only going to go for B2B SaaS companies, 250 to 500 people that use segment.com, and only target that. We were too scared to do that. And I think if we'd done that, we could have moved a bit faster. So don't confuse your ICP with your TAM. And then I have the other one, another learning, and I think that's just from coming from product. You tend to think a lot about product when you're a product person. And then everybody tells you need to find product market fit, and all you hear is product. That's all you hear. So for a lot of product people, product market fit means, fit the product to the market. But there's a lot of things that can be done where you go the other way and you fit the market to the product. So you just find another. If it doesn't work for that part of the market, go somewhere else. And I think that's another big learning we had along the way.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision here?
So the big picture for us is this automation angle. So because you've seen automation in B2C go-to-market for the last 20 years, and you're definitely seeing it now in the B2B space as well. But we want to be sort of a key platform for that. So something that enables B2B companies to run automated go-to-market at scale.
Love it. All right, we are up on time, and it's now 8 p.m. almost Copenhagen time, so I'm not going to keep you any longer here on a Friday. Before we wrap, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with your journey, if there's any marketers listening in that want to find out more about your product, where should they go?
So I think LinkedIn is the right place. So if you go and find Dreamdata on LinkedIn, you can find me as a CEO, connect with me. And then I usually say, if you travel to Copenhagen and you are in this space, definitely connect and we can figure something out.
Amazing. I love it. Lars, thanks so much for taking the time.
Great speaking to you today. Thank you.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.